Sir Keir Shiver and Rachel Freeze could have pensioners' blood on their hands this winter. They've cruelly cut the winter fuel payment to save around £1.4 billion. Money that's already been spent more than twice over so they could pay their union mates. This was the moment Labour officially consigned some pensioners to a freezing cold death.
Ayes to the right, 228. The noes to the left, 348.
And don't take my words for it that pensioners will die. Take the Labour Party's own report, OK? That revealed as many as 4,000 old people could be killed as a result. Just one Labour MP voted against it, John Trickett. 53 gutless cowards abstained, including Diane Abbott, apparently, of all people. They obviously feared losing the Labour whip more than the threat of elderly people shivering to death in their own homes this winter. The leader of the SNP in Westminster, Stephen Flynn, even said he saw a Labour MP punch the air, there you go, with delight when the winter fuel payment was scrapped. One of the elderly people who will be sitting in their living room wearing a coat, hat and gloves this winter is a 99-year-old World War II veteran. His name is Jim O'Dwyer. He flew 31 missions on Lancaster bombers during the war, only for Sir Keir Shiver and Rachel Freeze to rip his winter fuel payment away because he happens to have a small private pension. It's a disgrace. The sad fact is, this is a political decision. In my view, this is a punishment for the elderly because pensioners don't tend to vote Labour. But I tell you who is much more likely to vote Labour. Newly arrived refugees. Here's what the local council gives refugees from Afghanistan and Syria in Richmond and Wandsworth, OK? They pay landlords 6 weeks' rent in advance, they pay the council tax, they help furnish the property, they help them apply for all relevant welfare benefits and universal credit, helps them register with a GP, a dentist, even takes them to hospital appointments. They make regular home welfare visits, even takes the adults to the job centre. So all of that stuff. Now, I'm not saying that those people don't deserve support, but what I am saying is where's that level of support for our pensioners? Maybe that World War II veteran could nip round to a refugee's house to keep warm this winter. But honestly, what kind of country are we living in? Let's get the thoughts of my panel. We've got columnist and broadcaster Esther Krakow, got the former deputy chairman of the Conservative Party, Jonathan Gillis, and Labour Party activist Susie Stride. Esther, I'll start with you on this. Look, you know, this is, I think, a terribly bad look for Labour at the moment.
Well, it's a question of priorities. It's kind of like the adding VAT onto private school fees and to get maximum £1.7 billion, even though if you have a certain percentage, I think just 10% of privately educated kids going, public, that costs the state actually more. And there's, a deficit of over 4,000 teachers every year. It's the same case here. You're only saving £1.4 billion, but you're spending £5 billion on a broken asylum system, for example. And these are the things that people are struggling to understand. The argument here is that, 27% of pensioners have a net worth of over £1 million. But that could be the value of their house increasing, that they have no control over. So now should they sell their house or make themselves homeless so that they can pay for rising fuel payments? It's very hard when you attack or when you seem to cut the benefits of pensioners because they have no other means of earning an income. They're not young people, they're not mobile, they don't have that option. And the real issue that Labour has, and it's kind of sort of mimics the problem that Hollande had in France, which made him very unpopular. He's changing too much too quickly and demonstrating that his priorities are in the wrong place. And it's just bad news upon bad news upon bad news.
It's also the hypocrisy of him standing at the dispatch box and trying to slam Rishi Sunak for even thinking about doing this quite a while ago. But, Jonathan, do you think it's as simple as actually in this country you get a better deal if you're a refugee than you do if you're a pensioner?
Well, what I would say is that I think we have a social contract with pensioners at the end of the day. People who have contributed to the system have probably never taken out in many cases in this regard. And this is the first time they get a bit of something back, £300. In Stoke-on-Trent, 47,500 pensioners. In an area like Stoke-on-Trent, one of the most economically deprived parts of the country, people who won't have assets worth millions of pounds in terms of values of property and won't have millions of pounds sitting in bank accounts to be able to access, are about to lose £300 when energy prices
and sometimes
are about
have to be like £8 over the threshold to lose it. And
exactly.
It's very arbitrary. And the question is, where do your priorities lie? Because if these are the kinds of people that you're targeting, OK, then who's next on the chopping block?
And to back you up on the refugee and asylum situation, Stoke-on-Trent was the 5th largest contributor to the voluntary asylum dispersal scheme. That means we've had an awful lot of pressure on our social housing.
Yep.
We've got school places taken up with multiple teaching assistants required to speak in multiple different languages in order to be able to aid those students. We've obviously also having to pay to bus kids out of the city in order to be educated, all at the local council taxpayers' expense.
Exactly.
Pressure on the NHS as well, including that. You know, yes, in my opinion, it feels like if you come over to this country illegally, you get on there with your TikTok, waving your cash around in your 4 or 5-star hotel, everything funded, meals included. Yeah, if you're in a pensioner, we can't even do the decent thing of 300 quid.
Is that fair then, Susie? I mean, is that a fair thing to say that at the moment in this country, you're more likely to get your heating bills paid for and all of that stuff and get looked after if you have come here illegally, as opposed to, you know, we've got a World War II veteran there?
I mean, look, I looked at that article that was sent over, and look, what you're talking about there, those refugees, are a vast majority of them are those that in Afghanistan helped the British Army. So these are translators, these are people that helped the British Army, and if they were left there, they would have been assassinated, murdered, tortured, and they helped our army. And so, for me, I think, well, that's absolutely right. This is when you watch films in like 20 years' time and people say, how did your government just leave those people behind? Sorry, I don't want a country that leaves those people behind. And so when you look at that scheme that you were looking at, that targets refugees from Afghanistan that helped the British government, that if they were left in Afghanistan would be murdered, would be tortured. So that's one thing. What's going on with pensioners? That ultimately, look, Keir Starmer, Rachel Reeves, Johnny Reynolds, these guys did not come into politics to obviously cut, you know, the winter fuel allowance to pensioners. I mean, no one wants to do that. But unfortunately, we're in a situation. I mean, I'm not an economist, and we keep hearing this number, 22 billion black hole, and everyone's rolling their eyes, and I understand that. I don't know the full ins and outs, but ultimately, the fact is we have a difficult economic situation here, so we can't do everything that we want to do, and we're having to do things that we don't want to do. Right. And I think that's the situation we're in. But I think it's really important to put it in that wider context of saying, well, energy bills are going to be coming down.
But this is difficult, right? Because Labour still decided to borrow £3.1 billion to pay the unions.
Well, but this is the thing. I mean,
to lob 11 billion
train drivers are now going to be seeing more money than a junior doctor would even dream of making in 10 years, the first 10 years of their career. That's the kind of the reality is they're making choices. Yes, we're in a difficult situation, but when you make a choice that seems to have such a small sort of benefit to the country, that's when people get angry, because clearly your priorities are off whack. £1.4 billion in this scheme, 1.7 billion maximum potential for the VAT schemes. But what is the knock-on effect? Potentially, you know, thousands of pensioners dying, right? Overwhelming the state's education and having more teachers fleeing. This is what people are questioning. Why are your priorities so out of line that could actually worsen the situation?
Well, this is what I would argue makes it look overtly political. So they've looked at the demographics. They've thought people who send their kids to private school, by and large, demographically, are probably not going to vote Labour. They've also looked at the age demographics. Those people probably do not vote Labour, and they've hammered them, and I do wonder whether or not they are lying about that. But, Jonathan, I will throw this over to you. You've been in a position, no doubt, where you've had to vote for things or abstain from things where you've not been particularly happy with it. I do understand that there is an element to that is just politics, right? However, 53 Labour MPs today abstained from this vote. Some of them had the gall to come out and say, oh, well, you know, I had a pre-planned dental appointment. I'm sorry about that. I had a pre-planned dental appointment. I couldn't have voted with the government. Well, all right, but you're not saying you would have voted against it, are you? Just one singular Labour MP had the bottle to vote against this today. He'll lose the whip. Starmer would not have stripped the whip of 55 MPs. He couldn't have done that. So they actually just bottled it, didn't they? Well,
totally, at the end of the day. Look, yes, there are times you have to make difficult decisions. But as a politician, you also have to be able to look at your constituents in the eyes and take decisions that you think is right, something you can go to bed and sleep at night. And John Trickett himself has actually said he will sleep soundly tonight, knowing the decision that he's made. And I'm shocked that people like Diane Abbott, who were very vocal on these type of issues. In fact, even Labour MPs like Gareth Snell, who is the Stoke Central MP, in 2017 was busy holding up, I think GBNews actually has the graphic, which actually says on there that he signed it himself, not to cut the winter fuel payment back in 2017. So what happened to Gareth in 2017, and why is Gareth in 2024 willing to risk thousands of pensioners' lives in somewhere like Stoke-on-Trent Central? Again, one of the most economically deprived parts of the country. It is disgusting, it's shameful, it's callous, it's cowardly. And those Labour MPs had a real moment, and Jacob Rees-Mogg talks about it on his show yesterday. If you go in force and go in number, you can force your leader's hand, and there was an opportunity for them to act as one.
I'm sorry, I personally, just to say, I find it all a bit hypocritical, OK, because, I mean, not personal to anyone here, but I look at the Conservatives, and I sat there for 14 years, like I've worked front line in one of the most poverty-stricken areas in East London, and I saw a Conservative government, you know, destroying libraries, youth clubs, children's centres, the NHS. Lots of people died because Conservative MPs went and didn't vote to properly invest in the NHS, to properly invest, you know, in lots of frontline services. And so, look, I understand. I agree, you know, this is an uncomfortable decision. Do I think it's the right decision? I don't know. You know, what would I do? I'm not a Labour MP. I'm not sure. OK, but we do have to make tough decisions. And just to say, if we weren't making this tough decision, we'd be having this conversation. We'd be saying, well, the Labour Party aren't facing up to reality, are they?
How is it
but what I think is really important to say, and what I would not allow the Conservatives to get away with, 14 years of they went through those chambers, you know, and the number of things they cut and the lives that were destroyed, even mental health. I'm sorry, we've got a mental health crisis. And one of the reasons why we've got that crisis is because the decisions the Conservative government made.
I don't disagree with mental health point.
It's a tough decision when Labour does it, but it's criminal and destroying lives when the Tories do it. Surely it's just bad across the board. I don't see a hypocrisy here, because we're not arguing across party lines. We're talking about people, and we're talking about people's lives, and we're talking about people's livelihoods and how to foster a better, healthier society. If you're saying, oh, it's uncomfortable because Labour is making a tough decision, but when the Tories do it, it's criminal, then whose side are you really on?
Can I just say, sorry, it's only hypocrisy when you've got Conservatives saying, oh, no, this is terrible. This is what you just did for 14 years.
Let's talk about the hypocrisy of something like Stoke-on-Trent, which is Labour built a PFI hospital that takes £20 million a year from the front line and has actually not seen any improvement in health outcomes. When a Labour council has decided to close libraries, when actually the Conservatives have refurbished and reopened them, somewhere like Tunstall Town Hall, for example, when it was the Conservatives that secured £56 million for the Levelling Up Fund, more investment into our high streets, into our city, than secured under any Labour MP, Labour council and Labour government in history. Right. Labour allowed Stoke-on-Trent to rot. They only got back in because voters sat at home or went to reform. And I promise you this, will take back the city.
Can I just say, you're always going to have an example of where, OK, the Conservatives built one library, well done. Fine. The fact is, across this country, we built the hospitals, we built the schools. And there isn't a debate there. I do agree with you on PFI. I thought that was a very
Right, no, thank you very much. It's a lively start, and it's a cracking way to kick off the show. A spokesperson for Richmond and Wandsworth Council said Richmond Council provides support as part of the resettlement scheme established by the government for Afghan, Syrian and Ukraine sanctuary seekers. The funding for this support is provided by the government for these cohorts. It's a private rented scheme, and properties are put forward through the generosity of our residents and by working with local landlords. Yes, OK. The argument, I think, still stands as to whether or not we do treat refugees better than we are currently treating pensioners.